Hello everyone, I am Rebecca Lana, and in this video I'll be discussing the media resonance of a pivotal 2025 study by Nasi et al. Called Population Health Impact of New Drugs recommended by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in England during 2020, a retrospective analysis. I provocatively titled my presentation, What if New Drugs Cost More Lives Than They Save? And my analysis explores how this study was received across different sectors and media platforms and what that tell us about the broader policy and societal implications. About the Nasi et al. Study overview, the study basically evaluated the population health impact of new drugs approved by NICE between 2000 and 2020 in England. The key findings were that new drugs added 3.75 million qualities but displaced 5 millions, resulting in a net loss of around 1.25 million qualities. And why does it matter? Because it highlights trade offs in NHS drug fundings, challenges NICE cost effectiveness threshold, but also raises concerns for pharma overpricing model, market access, and public trust in innovation. The study, of course, has its limitation, but was considered very important in the field and worth of an analysis. So, about the assignment, this project was guided by an assignment from my supervisor, Frederick Arneber from UCB, to investigate the reaction sparked by this article. So, not just in academia, but also within the pharmaceutical industry, policymaking circles, and the general public. The key aims I focused myself on was to understand how a study like this, which challenges conventional thinking on drug values, can influence healthcare decision and shape public trust, but also what were the different opinions across sector, what was in this the role of social and traditional media, and what were the reactions from key stakeholders. Now, let's begin with the health policy implications. The study raises critical questions about how new drug approvals can redirect limited healthcare resources, potentially offering marginal benefit to a few while neglecting broader population needs. And this has direct relevance to health equity as it forces us to ask who actually benefit from high cost innovation and are these benefits distributed fairly? And this is specifically important for pharma companies since it implies that high cost drugs, like the ones for cancer or rare diseases, for example, may not be actually worth of priority, as high cost corresponds to benefits for a low number population. In publicly funded systems like the NHS, the tension between clinical innovation and equitable outcomes become especially pronounced. And the study also underscores the need for transparency and accountability in how we evaluate and approve drugs. When opportunity costs aren't clearly communicated, it can erode public trust. Evidence based decision making becomes not just a technical issue, but a societal and ethical one. So basically, the study emphasizes the need for policymakers to weigh short term against long term public health impacts. Now, let's dive in and let's start with the sources that I used. Here we can see social media platforms like Blue Sky and X, and then we have news, LinkedIn, and there was also Facebook, but it's 0.1%, so it's not even noticeable in the graph. Now, moving on to the weekly distribution. So, in terms of weekly distribution, the 481 mentions were fairly distributed, showing a surge in attention at launch with a tapering off over time. And this looks like the normal distribution, followed by any news that at first makes a lot of noise and then it tends to fade with time as well as people interest on the topic. Now, let's concentrate first on media outlets, so news and blogs specifically. Let's start with the methodology that I used. So, first, I use article level metrics from Altmetric and PlumX to identify the initial media coverage. And then I manually searched on Google using the article title and author names to find additional coverage. Moving on to inclusion criteria, I included any media outlet or blog that directly referenced the study or its findings. And then I read all the articles and recorded data on country, sector, tone, and engagement. And looking at the countries the media outlets were from, we can see that the percentages are based on the 31 total mentions in traditional media, and they gave us insight into the geographic spread of interest. Unsurprisingly, the UK featured most prominently, likely because of the study relevance to NHS and ongoing debates around the cost effectiveness in public healthcare. And then we see that Norway is second, and that could be for different reason. And Norway, like its Nordic neighbors, has a publicly funded healthcare system and a strong tradition of evidence-based policy. So a study like Nasia tells, which challenges the automatic approval of high-cost drugs, directly aligns with ongoing policy debates in Norway about cost effectiveness, health prioritization, and resource allocation. So Norwegian outlets may have picked it up to reflect or contribute to this local conversation. Furthermore, in media and public discourse, agenda setting often starts with an influential voice talking about it, and this is what has likely happened, causing a ripple effect among the experts cycle. By, but why hasn't it happened the same in other Scandinavian countries? Well, Norway, with respect to other Scandinavian countries, has a particularly active culture of public debate around healthcare policy. The press, professional journals, and even social media are often used by academics and professionals to question public spending, especially in welfare related sectors. And there's also a strong norm of public accountability in how healthcare budgets are used, which makes studies like Nasi et al.'s highly relevant for public conversation, and that's a possible reason. Here, we break down what types of media outlets were involved. So we categorize mention by whether they came from news sites, blogs, academic commentary, or policy focused outlets. And this helps us understand not just the quantity but the quality and framing of the discussion. For example, academic blogs and health policy sites tend to engage more seriously with the study's implication, while broader news sites focused on the controversy and potential headline value. Now, here the content is that zooms in which specific media outlets contributed to the most coverage. So these sources can be thought of as opinion leaders, platforms that shape how other outlets and even social media users interpret research findings. Here you can see very well known names that you might be familiar with, like MedWatch, the British Medical Journal, Dagens Medicines, or the Epoch Times, and many other. So now we move into how different professional sectors responded to the study. The data here is based on the 31 media articles coded by the main stakeholders involved, so academia, consultancy, general press, pharma, and state body. Academia and policy experts were more likely to be supportive of the study's conclusion, recognizing the call for cost benefit scrutiny, and this could be because researchers have long debated how to best allocate limited healthcare resources to maximize population health. And the study provides, even if with strong limitations, and that's important to say, empirical support for the idea that spending on high cost drugs with limited benefits might come at the expenses of more impactful interventions. Additionally, unlike the pharmaceutical industry or some policy bodies, academics are often less tied to commercial outcomes, and this gives them more freedom to critique systemic inefficiencies or ethical blind spots in drug pricings and approval systems. In contrast, industry responses were more defensive, often questioning the study's assumption or data interpretation. And this makes sense as the article taken into consideration represents a potential harm for pharma companies since it questions some drugs' high prices and the opportunity cost bounded to them. So I think this graph is important to illustrate how a single study can polarize stakeholders based on their underlying interests. Now, looking at social media platforms, so namely X and Blue Sky, the study generated 445 mentions at the time of my project, showing that it didn't just stay within the expert circles. Social media provided a space for emotional, moral, and political reactions, which were often more visual than those in traditional outlets. These reactions are important because they reflect public sentiment, and public sentiment can pressure policymakers. So, while not always evidence based, these opinions are part of the real world consequences of health research visibility. So, looking at the methodology, since I was manually coding the post, I couldn't do it for all the 445 posts. So, I had to take a sample. I used a margin of error of 15% with a p value of 0.55, and I took a sample of 40 posts, 25 from X and 13 from Blue Sky. And each post was manually coded for platform, opinion, country, sector, and profession. So, what this means is that the focus needs to be on trends rather than specific numbers, and that the purpose is to look at the general sentiment of the broader population outside the expert circles. Now, here we look at which countries engage most with the study on social platforms. As expected, the UK dominates, reflecting the study's relevance to NHS policy, whereas the US are seconds. And here we can notice a way broader involvement from people all around the world, highlighting the role of social media of connecting people and making news spread and reach a broader public. And here it is noticeable that Norway do not appear in the sample. And as explained earlier, it's not about exact numbers. And there are almost certainly Norwegians that commented or posted about the article, but for sure the news did not create in the rest of the country the same debate that spread among experts in the field. Now, to make fair comparisons across different population sizes, I normalized mention per million inhabitants, and this confirms that UK's relative interest was very high, together with Ireland and Sweden. Now let's take a look at how different sectors responded to the Nazi et al. Study across two social media platforms, X and Blue Sky. So we can see that medical personnel category had the highest number of mentions, with a mix of opinions, some agreeing, some neutral, and a portion of disagreeing. And medical professionals often have frontline insights into how new drugs affect clinical practice. So their mixed reaction likely reflect the tension between innovation and cost awareness they experience daily. Academics, instead, were the second most vocal group, and nearly all of them agreed with the study's conclusion, and some were neutral on Blue Sky. And academic support is likely high because the study validates evidence based, cost conscious policymaking, which aligns with the research priorities in general. And then we have media voices that were few, as well as patients and public sector. I think in general we can say that Blue Sky's audience is more niche, skewing towards experts and public servants, and usually this tend to create um, a more measured, policy-oriented conversation, whereas X has a bit more of a broader and more mixed public. Now, looking at the most liked comment, this is from X, and it's from Samuel Hume with 228 likes and 33.1k views. And it's actually pretty neutral, but reporting the article. And as you can see, instead, all the other three posts that I mentioned have fewer likes, but um, high a high number of visuals. And this was just to make some examples of the discussion people were making. Now, this quote is from Umberto Eco. Social media gives everyone a platform, including those who once only voiced their opinion at a bar, and now their voice can shape public discourse. And this captures how digital spaces can amplify all kinds of voices, not just expert ones. And what this means is that while democratized discourse is valuable, it also means that important health studies can be reframed, misunderstood, or politicized in ways that the authors never intended. So many of the posts I read were actually just one or few words or simply reposts with no comments. So the suspect is that not everyone who commented on the article actually read it carefully and got informed on the topic properly. Now, what does all this data tell us? So, early buzz and media attention. As I said, there was strong visibility at launch with a sharp decline over time. Most sources were actually from social media, and traditional media outlets offered fewer but deeper and more analytical contribution. And that could be because initial interest spiked due to the provocative findings, but attention declined as the topic became technically complex and less visible to the general public. And adding to that, what I said earlier is that it's a bit the same with every news. that generates a lot of interest at first and then it tends to decline. Looking at experts' reaction, we can see that 58.1% of experts' opinions were positive, with a 19.4% criticism centered on limited therapeutic focus and resource assumptions. Opinion varied by stakeholders, and that's because each group reflects its priorities. So academia values methods, pharma is concentrated about pricing, state actor with feasibility, and media cater to public framing. Looking instead at social media dynamics, so we see that 58% of posts were from X and 32 from Blue Sky. And Blue Sky is generally dominated by academics, while X has a broader mix of stakeholder. The activity peaked in December 2024 and January 2025 and then declined sharply. So X remains dominant, whereas Blue Sky attracts expert community. Initial buzz faded after the first wave of coverage. And then looking at the geographic distribution of attention, in media outlet coverage was concentrated in the UK with 58.1 with relatively few contribution from other countries, and instead on social media countries were way more diverse. And that's because traditional media reflects institutional proximity. UK interest stems from nice relevance. Instead, social media enables broader international academic participation and not just academic, but from a general public. So, looking at the overall assessment, the study sparked wide attention at launch, and as we already said, over time visibility declined. But the thing is that the core issue remain relevant, and while public discourse moved on, the question raised still matters to policymakers, economists, and health system designers. So the long term of the articles lies not in media cycles, but in how it reframes value and priority setting in healthcare. So, what are the implications for communication in health policy? We saw that sustaining attention on complex health topics remain challenging. Media coverage favors immediacy while long-term impacts is less visible. And studies like this need to be communicated in ways that are accessible for both experts and the public. And this matters because for findings to shape policy, communication strategies must bridge the gap between academic depth and public media engagement. So, thank you for listening.